It's time!
Welcome into the locker room. Listen, now that I am at 2 shows a week, there is a new format for the show. So every Tuesday is going to be a miniature series of some sort. To kick us off, I am giving you my top 15 NBA players of all time. This is a passion subject of mine, so I was very excited to debut this first. And then every Thursday is going to be your sports catch-up. What's going on in the world of sports for that day? What's been going on? NFL, hockey, soccer, baseball, basketball, you name it. We're going to be discussing it on Thursdays. It's going to be a hodgepodge, but every Tuesday will be your miniature series. So today we are kicking off my top 15 NBA players of all time list. On today's episode, you will be getting numbers 15, 14, and 13, along with my honorable mentions in 16, 17, and 18. And I know top 15 all time sounds a little bit weird. Usually people do top 20, top 25, or top 10 only. The reason I picked the number 15 is for a very specific reason, so you'll find that out here in just a second. But before I can get into my NBA's top 15 players list, make sure you're following TLR Podcast 615 on social media. That is TLR Podcast 615 on social media. I know people ask me the question all the time, Jacob, why do you always plug your social media? Why do you always have to lead off the show that way? Well, there's a reason. Because social media is how I am going to be successful. It is because of you all and social media. We live in the digital age. If you want this show to keep going, if I want it to keep growing, if I want to be able to move up, get bigger guests, it's all about the number of people following, the number of people liking, the number of people disliking, responding, doesn't matter. The more people, the better. The bigger the audience, the greater. I ain't doing this for money. I do this because I love it. But I'd love to get some bigger guests on here, and, you know, they always come back to the age-old question, well, you've got a small number on social media. Even if I have a large number of listeners, they don't care. So you all can help me out more than you absolutely know by following me on social media. That is TLR Podcast 615 on social media. Now let's get into the top 15 NBA players of all time.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go!
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go!
Let's go all the way back to 8-year-old Jacob sitting in a barbershop chair on a Saturday morning with his father and his brother on either side of him, listening to the age-old debate, who is the greatest player of all time in the NBA? Who is in your top 5? Who's in your top 10? I grew up with this subject being debated around me, and it has become a passion subject of mine to talk about in the sports world. I love talking the greatest of all times in the NBA. Because for some reason, the NBA is the only professional league where we debate this more than any other league. In the NFL, for the most part, people accept Tom Brady as the greatest of all time. There's not a whole lot of arguments. For the most part, Lawrence is the greatest defensive player of all time. No one really argues it. This debate doesn't go on with baseball players. This debate doesn't go on with soccer or tennis or hockey or golf. Not like it does with the NBA. The NBA, for some reason, has a bunch of passionate people that love to argue this subject. I'm one of them. And from a young age, all the way up until the age of 26, this has been a burning question. And so I spent the last 5 months, 4 to 5 months, researching the greatest NBA players of all time. So I'm just telling you all that to tell you this. When I tell you and reveal my list, this is something I've thought a very long time about, I've researched a lot about, and I feel like I've done as much justice to this list as I possibly can. I took personal conviction out of it. I took the likability out of it, because a lot of these players I'm not giant fans of, don't really like them as people. Maybe I didn't even like them as players. But I took all the objectiveness out of it, and I just looked at the hard facts, the hard evidence. And here's the criteria that I'm judging my grades on. So that way you understand why I'm coming from where I'm coming from. I'm judging my grades on 4 criteria. Criteria number 1, NBA championships. Criteria number 2, individual accolades. Criteria number 3, postseason success and postseason accolades. Criteria number 4, franchise impact. What did you mean to that franchise when you left? If you were to leave, would that franchise be desecrated, or would that franchise be just as successful as they were when they had you? That's the criteria. Those 4 things is the criteria for how I am judging my grades. So now that you know the criteria of how I'm judging my GOATs, I want you to know the era that I'm judging. I'm judging the entire NBA era, from the history of the game until 2022. So this is the greatest of all time, not the greatest of the last 75 years, not the greatest of the last 50 years. So when guys like Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain pop up on my list, don't scratch your head and be confused, because this is an all-time list, okay? Just so we're clear on that. Now let's get into my honorable mentions before we go any further. At number 17, we've got Giannis Antetokounmpo. Now, I am not one of those guys who likes to jump the gun. A lot of people did it with Steph Curry when he won his 2nd ring or 3rd ring. I'm not a guy that's just going to throw somebody in the top 10 just because they're successful immediately, or just because they're successful in the now and present. Giannis is incredible. Giannis has the potential, and I will say this now, Giannis has the potential that if he continues on this upward trend, if he continues to win basketball at a high level, win championships, win MVPs, and dominate the game as the best defensive player and best offensive player and best player in the world, if he continues on this trend like he has been, going up and up and up and up, he could end up a top 5 player of all time. Now I know that might sound crazy, but that's why I didn't put Giannis all the way up at number 10 right out of the gate. See, a lot of lists right now have Giannis in the top 15. They have him at 13 or 10. I'm not going to jump the gun too quick on Giannis, because if he never plays another game of basketball, he'll stay at number 17. He's that great already. He's top 20 already. And he still has a whole lot of more basketball to play. But it's a whole lot easier to move a player up in the list than it is to move a player back in the list. And I'm not going to look like a dumbass because I put him all the way up at 9 or 10, because that's what's trendy right now. But Giannis is the only player that's actively playing that has the opportunity to jump up in the top 5. I don't think he'll be number 5, but 6, 7, he has the real life possibility to be number 6 or number 7 all time. I even heard somebody say this, I think it was Chris Broussard and Nick Wright. Giannis, if he continues this upward trend, happens to win 4 or 5 more rings, dominates at the eclipse that he's dominating, plays defense at the eclipse that he's playing defense, he has the potential to be in the GOAT conversation. Not just in the top 5, but in the GOAT conversation. Now, I'm not going to push all the way to GOAT conversation, but Giannis is that special. So Giannis is number 17 for me, with a whole lot more room to grow. At number 16, before we get into my top 15, this is the last guy, Kevin Durant. I know. Several of you are really mad right now. Several of you right now are throwing stuff. Several of you are already getting ready to DM me and say what an awful, terrible moron I am. Here's the deal. I'm not a prisoner of the moment. And I'm also not a prisoner of scoring. Because just because you're one of the most skilled scorers we've ever seen does not mean that you deserve to be top 10, does not mean you deserve to be top 15. It was a stretch for me to put Kevin Durant at 16 and not put Giannis at 16 and Kevin Durant back at 17. Dead serious. While Kevin Durant is one of the most skilled players we have ever seen, one of the most skilled offensive players we have ever seen, he's a decent defender, not a great defender. He has 2 championships. Great. 2 finals MVPs. Great. He joined a super team to get them. That has to matter when we're talking about the greatest of all time. If LeBron James links up with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in this offseason and wins 6 more rings, do you not think that that's a relevant factor for the GOAT conversation? Because I do. Does Michael Jordan not having the greatest coach of all time, not having 3 or 4 Hall of Famers matter? I think it does. Kevin Durant, we can't just crown Kevin Durant top 15 just because he's a great scorer. Just because he has 2 championships. Look at the context of the championships. You have to when we're talking this detailed of a conversation. He joined a super team with Hall of Fame Klay Thompson, Hall of Fame Steph Curry, Hall of Fame Draymond Green, Hall of Fame Steve Kerr. Well, that's 3 Hall of Fame players, 1 Hall of Fame coach. Hell, by the NBA's criteria, Andre Iguodala will probably be a Hall of Famer. I cannot slide Kevin Durant up any further, nor do I think Kevin Durant can move up that much further unless he goes on a dominant streak for the next 5 years to end his career. Unless Kevin Durant joins up with LeBron, wins 4 or 5 championships, 3 or 4 championships, how can Kevin Durant jump up drastically up into the top 10? He can't. He's not going to win a lot of league MVPs. If he wins a bunch more rings, if he links up with LeBron, he'll have a couple more finals MVPs, a couple more championships. He'll be the final, he'll be the best player on those teams. So that will help his case. And that's what he should have just stayed in Golden State, won 8 rings, and then no one would really debate if he's up there in the greatest of all time list. If you're going to be the biggest girl, I'm not going to use the B word like Draymond. If you're going to be I will. If you're going to be the biggest bitch in sports history and go all the way up to Golden State to link up with Golden State because you just can't beat them even though you had them up 3-1 the year before, if that's what you're going to do, play into that villain role the rest of your career. Stay at Golden State, dominate the league, make the league boring to watch, and then guess what? No one would say a word to you because you would be sitting on 5-6 championships right now with 5-6 finals MVPs. You would be the most dominant franchise to ever grace this, the most dominant dynasty in NBA history. I mean, I think people, at the end of the day, people wouldn't care that you went to Golden State. All they would really notice is the fact that you have 6 championships, 6 finals MVPs, and you dominated the league for the last 10 years. But you chose not to do that. You've ran to different teams. You ran to Brooklyn. Now you want out of Brooklyn. You could not impact winning at a high level in Brooklyn. You could not win playoffs. I don't care who was injured. If you're that guy, if you're a top 15 guy, you impact winning to the point where you will drag bad teams to playoff victories. You will drag bad teams to conference finals. Every guy on this list drug teams that weren't that great at some point in their career and made them great because he was great. Kevin Durant is not that guy. You're lucky I put him up at 16. But that being said, let's get into my list. Let's get into the top 15 NBA players of all time.
Number 15.
At number 15, I have one Karl Malone. And I know what you're thinking at home. Jacob, how in the world can Karl Malone be in your 15 if he doesn't have an NBA championship and doesn't have a finals MVP? That's a part of the criteria, right? You have to have those 2 things. That's not true. I said that's partially how I judge my GOATs. But there's a list of 4 different criteria. There's a lot of guys that have NBA championships. Hell, there's even some guys that have an NBA championship and a finals MVP, and they wouldn't sniff the top 30 all time, let alone the top 15. Just to throw out a name here, how about Andre Iguodala? Has a finals MVP, has multiple championships. He will never, ever, ever be discussed in the top 15. Ever. If the entire top 15 list never existed, and the only name on that list was Andre Iguodala, he still wouldn't make his own list. What Karl Malone did was dominate the league for 17 straight years. He was the definition of the word consistent before Tim Duncan even knew what the word consistent meant. Before Tim Duncan could say his first words, Karl Malone was literally writing in the dictionary, the word consistent means Karl Malone. 17 straight years. There was a 17-year stretch, minus 2 seasons, his first season and his last season, where he averaged averaged, mind you, 26 points a game, 10.3 rebounds a game. Those are numbers that players literally dream about having. He averaged a double-double, 26 and 10 for 17 years. I get it. He had some shortcomings when it came to the playoffs. He lost some close series where he should have closed those games out. He doesn't have an NBA championship. That's why Karl Malone isn't in my top 10. That's why Karl Malone isn't in my top 5. He doesn't have the rings. He doesn't have the finals MVPs. He doesn't have the postseason accolades that I would like, although he does have some postseason accolades. But for a guy to be second all-time in scoring, well, now third because one LeBron James eclipsed him. So he's third all-time in scoring, 7th in rebounds all-time, 11th in steals all-time, 58th in assists all-time, and 67th in blocks all-time. For a guy to be that dominant for that long, that has to matter. His personal accolades speak for himself. What he meant to the franchise of the Utah Jazz was he kept the Utah Jazz on the map. He drugged that franchise to the playoffs every single year. And if Karl Malone had one or two other guys, I think we would be looking at Karl Malone as one of the greatest players of all time, right there with Michael, LeBron, Kareem, and so on. He has one or two other guys that help win him a couple rings, and he's the finals MVP of 3 or 4 championships. His numbers speak for themselves. His dominance speaks for itself. In fact, I almost argued putting Karl Malone a little bit higher on my list. But because of his postseason shortcomings, because of not having an NBA championship, he rests safely at number 15.
We are looking at how to pronounce 14. The pronunciation of the number 14. 14.
At number 14, we have one Oscar Robertson. The Big O finally shows up on the list. Now, this is a guy wildly underrated as well. Easily could have been pushed up a little bit further, but I have a tough top 10, let alone top 15. It's hard to move up in my list. But he is a guy that is wildly disrespected in this league, wildly disrespected historically. He is the first player ever to record a triple-double average for a season. He has an NBA title. He has an MVP, 9 All-NBA first-team selections, 12 All-Star selections. He's 7th in assists all-time, 13th in scoring all-time, 75th in rebounds all-time. One of the most dynamic playmakers from the point guard position that we have ever seen all-time. Right up there with Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson's the most gifted passer of all time. LeBron would be second, but Oscar Robertson, as far as a playmaker, he's right up there with Magic Johnson as one of the most dynamic playmakers of all time. He didn't experience much success until later at the end of his career, but still won an NBA title, got an MVP, rebounded at a high eclipse, scored at a high eclipse, played defense at a high eclipse. Mr. Triple-Double. This is a guy that when you talk to the greats, you talk to Kareem, you talk to Magic, you talk to a lot of these guys, they all said the same thing about Oscar Robertson. He's wildly disrespected, and you would never, ever want to play against him. They even said it to Michael Jordan even said it, that Oscar Robertson would be a guy that he thinks would give him fits. An all-around dynamic player. He has the personal accolades. He has championships. He has postseason accolades. Mr. Triple-Double himself, Oscar Robertson, 14.
I'm the clumsiest number you've ever seen. Unlucky number 13. Oh.
Rounding out the episode, coming in at number 13. This is a guy that doesn't get enough love as an individual. He's not a very likable person. There may or may not have been a certain documentary that came out during the pandemic that painted him in not so favorable of a light. This is a guy that didn't have as lengthy of a career as a lot of these guys in the top 15. So not very likable guy. Not painted in a very good light in a certain documentary. I won't name names of the documentary. Didn't spend as much time on the court as a lot of these guys in the top 15. But what he did on the court is absolutely undeniable. I have him a lot higher than just about any list you will see, but I don't understand how this guy gets so disrespected in the NBA light. He's kind of blacklisted because of the things that he says, because of certain documentaries, because he didn't spend 20 years in the NBA. But this guy deserves to be on my list at number 13. At number 13, one Isaiah Thomas. He is a 2-time NBA Finals winner, 1-time Finals MVP, 3-time All-NBA First Team selections, 12-time All-Star selection, number 9th in assists, 17th in steals, 65th in scoring. Now, what Isaiah Thomas did to prove his way onto my list and to prove his way all the way up to number 13 is Isaiah Thomas went toe-to-toe with the greats of his day and beat them more times than he lost to them. He has a 12-6 record against one Michael Jordan, a guy that will be in the top 3 on this list. Maybe 1, maybe 2. Hell, he may be 3. But he's in the top 3 all time. 12-6 record against him. Went toe-to-toe with the greats of his day. And not only did he hold his own, but he won 2 titles under Michael Jordan's watch. This guy, you want to talk about competitive. This guy's competitiveness is right there with Jordan's. This guy is right there with Michael Jordan if we're talking competitiveness versus competitiveness. He was the face of the bad boy Pistons who beat Michael Jordan's Bulls 3 straight times in the playoffs. In the 80s, in the prime of Michael Jordan's powers, Isaiah Thomas was his kryptonite for so long. 3 straight years, Michael Jordan gets his bags packed by one Isaiah Thomas. All 6'1" of them. And 6'1" is being generous. All 5'11" of Isaiah Thomas gave Michael Jordan fits. But he didn't just do that. He was the glue that held the bad boy Pistons together. You want to talk about what a guy meant to a franchise? Isaiah Thomas was the bad boy Pistons. Isaiah Thomas was the gas that let the engine run. Without Isaiah Thomas, the bad boy Pistons don't win back-to-back titles. They don't bump Jordan out 3 years in a row. Isaiah Thomas meant everything to the Detroit Pistons. And the biggest knock that he gets all the time is people want to paint this narrative, and this is just because they simply don't do the research, that Isaiah Thomas could not score. Isaiah Thomas was just an okay offensive player. He never showed up in big games. Well, guess what? Every time they needed Isaiah Thomas to have a heroic performance in the playoffs, he did so. Every time it was a closeout game, every time it was a must-win, Isaiah Thomas was the guy offensively averaging 30 points. See, that's the thing. Isaiah Thomas didn't play outside of what they needed. Isaiah Thomas could have gone every night and tried to get 30 points, but that's not what he was best at. He was the gas to the engine. If he had to guard the best player, he would guard the best player. If he had to score, he would score. If he had to be a playmaker, he would be a playmaker. In the playoffs, Isaiah Thomas was a killer. He showed up in closeout games. Isaiah Thomas is absolutely everything you would want from your star. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hell, I didn't know all that about Isaiah Thomas. Yeah, because he doesn't get a good rep. He's not very likable. And one Michael Jeffrey Jordan came out with a documentary that kind of made him look a little foolish. So you mix all of that together with already not being very likable, Then Jordan comes out, drops a documentary about you. And you don't play 20 years in the NBA. You have a much more shortened career with star standards. People go, he wasn't that great. Isaiah Thomas, my number 13, all time. Now this list already, I'm jazzed, I'm pumped. This list already is getting a little hard to decipher between who deserves to be where. Because if Isaiah Thomas is back all the way at 13, I very arguably could have put him up at 11. And I don't think there'd be much of an argument from a lot of people. So the guys above him have got to be pretty special, and I'm here to say that they are. Listen, every Tuesday you will get 3 players released on the list. This is episode number 1. Players 15 through 13. So make sure you share it with a friend. You follow along. Make sure at TLR Podcast 615 on Instagram so you can see all of the stuff that I'm going to be doing with this. There's going to be a lot of daily voting things. There's going to be a lot of things you can be involved in and a lot of fun things on there. So TLR Podcast 615 on Instagram. I'm so pumped for this series. Yeah, I mean, guys, this list, I'm just looking at my list right now. I cannot wait for episode 2 of my top 15 NBA players of all time to come out. So I will see you on Thursday with a brand new episode of the Locker Room Podcast. And I will see you next Tuesday so we can continue our mini-series of the top 15 greatest players of all time. Once again, everybody, I'm Jacob Courtwright, and this is the Locker Room.